The first step in the LPO process is the selecting of targets. Most of these targets should be chosen by the job experts during the supervisor's monthly LPS stewardship meeting. Select tasks that have the highest potential to have a loss. Base the selection on tasks that have a high level of risk, as well as the company's history of losses and near losses.
Now that we've gone over the alerts and bulletins and LPO findings for the last month, let's go ahead and pick our LPO target areas for next month.
Several of the alerts talked about people rushing while loading out for jobs and forgetting to load the right equipment. I think that we should do some of our LPOs on crews loading out for jobs.
Hey, sounds good. I'll put it on our LPO schedule.
Only a few employees at a time from each location should be chosen to be observers. Observers should be rotated every 3 months. The long-range goal should be that all employees will eventually be an observer.
Okay, now it's time to rotate out our observers. Monty, you did a really good job the last 3 months. Really appreciate what you did with it. Rick, you've sat in on several observations and feedback sessions. Why don't you go ahead and take Monty's place?
LPOs should be scheduled at the supervisor's monthly LPS stewardship meeting. The general rule of thumb is 1 LPO per 10 employees per week. As a minimum, the schedule should show the task, the observer, and the approximate date. This schedule should be placed on some sort of schedule board and hung where all employees can see it. Always make sure the person being observed knows they are being observed that day.
So Rick, you're scheduled to observe a crew loading out a job tomorrow. Let's make sure we notify the crew leader and the person we're going to be observing so they can be aware that we're going to be doing the LPO process.
The observer should prepare themselves before conducting the LPO. The observer should review the JLA for the task, as well as any other company SOPs, procedures, or policies related to the task. The observer should also read any recent alerts, bulletins, or LPOs associated with this task. The observation should be conducted for approximately 20 to 30 minutes depending on the task. The observer should act as a video camera, not a judge. Focus on important safe behaviors that the observee does correctly and identify any time the observee deviates from company standards or accepted practices. Put the number of times you see the person doing the act, either correctly or not, according to standards, in the boxes provided on the back of the LPO form. The observer should add comments about the most important behaviors that were done correctly and any questionable items. After the observation is complete, the observer should give a 5-minute overview to the supervisor. This is a chance for the two of them to agree on what will be discussed with the observee. The supervisor should make sure the LPO form is filled out correctly. They should agree on the most significant 4 or 5 behaviors that the observee performed correctly, as well as the % of correct items for the entire observation. They should also agree on what questionable items they will discuss with the observee during the feedback session. The feedback session should include the supervisor, observer, and observee. It should be conducted within 1 hour after completing the observation, or at least by the end of that shift. The following is an example of a proper 6-step feedback session.
Guys, thanks for taking the time to conduct this LPO today and taking the time to conduct the feedback session. If you remember, in our last monthly meeting, we read several alerts where employees were loading out for jobs and they got in a hurry and they missed loading up some equipment. So that's why we wanted to do an LPO today while you were loading out equipment. Rick, why don't you run us through some of the important things that Jonathan did correctly during the observation?
Yes, I noticed Jonathan checked the pressure on the nitrogen tank. He also drained the knockout pot and checked all the gauges to make sure that none were broken. I also noticed that he checked to make sure that the vacuum breaker was seated properly.
Great. Sounds like he did some very important things correctly. Jonathan, what types of losses did you avoid by doing the things correctly that Rick pointed out?
Well, I know that if we get a fire or a carbon bed overheat, I need the nitrogen system to inert the beds and put the fire out, so my pressure is important. Also, with the knockout, I know that if I don't drain it, I can cause an environmental release from the back pressure. I always check the gauges because if they're broken, I'll never know my carbon beds are overheating and that I have an issue.
That's great, Jonathan. So why did you check to make sure that the vacuum breaker was seated properly?
Oh yeah, if I don't check the vacuum breaker, it can cause a release of vapors.
Beside those 4 important items that Jonathan did correctly, he also had a 95% overall correct score on the observation.
All right, Jonathan, that's a good score.
He did have one questionable item that I observed. I noticed when he was lifting the hoses to put them on the trailer that he lifted with his back and twisted instead of lifting with his legs.
So, Jonathan, would you agree that this is a questionable item?
Yes, I probably would say it was if I lifted that way.
At this point, once everyone agrees that this is a questionable item, the supervisor should lead the observer and observee through the FRCS, Factors, Root Causes, and Solutions Flowchart. The FRCS should be followed through all 7 of the factors. For those factors that are chosen, the root causes should be written and the proper solution should be implemented.
Jonathan, what could go wrong if you lift with your back instead of your knees and you twist while you're carrying the load?
Well, I could strain a muscle or pinch a nerve.
And what's the worst thing that could happen if you do hurt your back?
I could miss a lot of work, then I wouldn't be able to pay my bills. That'd be pretty bad.
So, can we get your commitment that you'll follow the training and lift properly?
Yes, you have my word. I really can't afford to miss any work.
Great job, guys. Now let me summarize the feedback session. We did this observation today because we had several other locations where we read alerts where locations had incidents while loading out jobs. Rick found a lot of good things that Jonathan did during the observation. We felt like the 4 most important things were checking the nitrogen tank pressure, draining the knockout tank, checking all the gauges, and making sure the vacuum brake was seated. We also discussed what losses may have been avoided by doing these 4 things correctly. Your overall score was 95%. That's awesome. There was one item that we all agreed was questionable. You lifted the hoses without bending your knees, and you twisted while you were loading the hoses on the trailer because you were in a hurry. You said that the worst thing that could happen is you could have hurt your back and lost a lot of work time. You committed to us that you would always use proper lifting techniques moving forward. Now I'd like to give some feedback to Rick on his observation. It was evident by the list of positive comments that you came up with that you had done a good job preparing for the observation. You also did a good job of watching closely and catching a questionable item that would probably help Jonathan going forward. One thing you can work on is probably adding more comments on the back of the form so others can see exactly what you saw. Thanks to both of you for participating in this observation today. Y'all both did a really good job.
After the feedback session, the supervisor should do a quality check of the LPO form and enter it into the LPS database. All solutions discussed in the feedback session should be implemented and communicated to the rest of the location. This can usually be discussed at the supervisor's monthly LPS stewardship meeting. All solutions should be V&V'd 100% of the time by the supervisor that conducted the feedback session. The best way to V&V a solution is to witness the employee performing the same task or similar task at a later date. Remember that you should wait at least 1 week before doing a V&V of a personal commitment to change behavior. Another way to V&V a solution is to have a conversation with the employee if you cannot watch them perform the task again in a reasonable amount of time. The following is an example of this type of conversation.
Hey, Jonathan, how's it going?
Pretty good. What's up?
Hey, you got a few minutes?
Sure.
Okay. Hey, I wanted to talk to you about an observation you participated in last week. Do you remember some of the things Rick pointed out that you did correctly?
Yes, sir. I remember I checked the nitrogen tank to make sure it had pressure. I drained the knockout tank, inspected all the hoses and gauges, and I made sure the vacuum breaker was properly seated.
That's great. Do you remember what the one questionable item was?
Yes, I lifted with my back and not my knees when lifting the hose. And then I gave my commitment that I would lift with my knees and use proper technique from now on. Definitely don't want to miss any time because of a back injury.
Okay, that's good, Jonathan. Hey, it sounds like you really learned something from the observation. Keep up the good work.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Managers need to spot check the LPO process. They should V&V solutions for some of the LPOs and also check on the overall LPO process. Here is an example of a manager doing a V&V of an LPO solution and also checking on the LPO process.
Hey John, I want to do a V&V on an observation you were involved in a few weeks ago. Do you remember the observation where an employee was loading hoses onto a scrubber trailer and he used incorrect lifting techniques?
Yes, I remember that one. Rick Pittman was watching someone loading and pre-tripping one of our scrubber trailers.
How did Rick and Jonathan know what the observation was going to be on?
We have an LPO schedule board in our break room. The guys pick out target areas for our LPOs at their monthly stewardship meeting.
That's great. Do you know if Rick prepared for the observation?
Yes, he did. He read through the scrubber JLA, and also he read through the scrubber maintenance manual, which tells what to check for when you're pre-tripping the scrubber.
Sounds like you guys are following the LPO process correctly. Is Jonathan around today?
Yeah, let's go find him.
Okay. Hey Jonathan, you have a few minutes?
Sure, what's up?
I was looking over LPOs in the database and saw one that was done on you while you were loading out a scrubber trailer a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
Do you remember the questionable item that Rick found during the observation?
Sure do. He said I wasn't lifting right when I lifted the hoses, that I was bending with my back and not bending with my knees, and that I was twisting putting it up on the trailer.
So are you doing anything different now?
Yes, I'm trying to take my time now, make sure I bend with my knees and use all the proper lifting techniques. I definitely don't want to hurt my back and be off work.
That's great, Jonathan. Sounds like you guys are doing things the correct way now. Did you guys discuss anything else during the feedback session?
Yes, Rick also told me 3 or 4 things I was doing right, and that I got an overall 95% on the observation.
Okay, great job. Sounds like you guys are doing some good observations and feedback sessions. Let's keep up the good job.